All right, welcome everyone. Hello, I'm Rebecca Starr. I am the Midwest manager of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and I am greeting you today from my home in the Metro Detroit area. And I hope that as you join us, you're doing your best to stay both healthy, both in mind and in spirit, in the challenging time in our world right now. And we thank you for taking the time to join us and to learn with us with leading scholar and thinker, the president of the Institute, Danielle Hartman. The Institute encourages community members, leaders, change agents to think deeply and courageously about complicated issues of the day. Thought leadership and the ability to think critically, philosophically through the lens of traditional and modern text is a necessary and crucial part of the future of Jewish peoplehood in the US, in Israel, and beyond. Perhaps this mission is even more important now as our lives are in a true state of chaos. Today, we come together from all parts of the world with just over 600 people registered from the US, Israel, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and Uruguay. Although this public lecture is not taking place as we had originally imagined that it would, we thought it would be in person in our local community here in Michigan. A clear silver lining is found in our current situation. It's the ability that we now have to share resources and to access each other's communities. Here in Detroit, this lecture is a partnership between the Hartman Institute and Congregation Beth Ahm of West Bloomfield, Michigan. It's also made possible through generous support from the William Davidson Foundation. In addition, there are many staff members and lay leaders working behind the scenes to make sure that we can offer this webinar, and they also deserve our sincere thanks. So just a couple things to note. You will be able to ask questions through the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We thank you in advance for submitting them, and we will do our best to ask Donniel to answer some of those questions at the end of his lecture. And also please note that at the conclusion of our session today, you're going to receive a notice on your screen asking you to take a survey. And we really value this feedback, and we appreciate you taking the time to complete it. And now I'd like to welcome Rabbi Rubenstein, spiritual leader of Congregation Beth Ahm, to join us and introduce Donniel.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Really glad to be with you, and thanks everyone for being with us today. I told Rabbi Hartman that I did have the opportunity to meet him a few years ago, and he was here in Michigan. I wish he were here in Michigan today, but we thank him for joining us to talk about the issue of community, which is on the minds of the Jewish community always, and perhaps even more in the last few months because of all that we are enduring and experiencing. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman. He is the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, holds the Richard and Sylvia Kaufman Family Chair. He's the author of the highly regarded 2016 book, Putting God Second, How to Save Religion from Itself. Donniel is the founder of some of the most extensive education, training, and enrichment programs for scholars, educators, rabbis, and religious and lay leaders in Israel and North America. He holds a PhD in Jewish philosophy from Hebrew University, an MA in political philosophy from New York University, and an MA in religion from Temple University and rabbinic ordination from the Shalom Hartman Institute. He is working on his next book, which is entitled, Who Are the Jews? Which I would have thought he knew already, but perhaps the book will shed additional light. I'm sure it will. He is married to Adina and is the father of 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Thanks so much for teaching us today.
Thank you, Stephen. And in some sense, it's very nice to be with all of you and to learn together. I too wish I could be with you, but there are some advantages. Weather is more beautiful here in Jerusalem. I want to talk about us. And Jews, we have an obsession about talking about us. We're constantly trying to understand who are we? How do we make sense of who we are? Maybe we do that because, Stephen, you said, I know, maybe we don't really know. Maybe because there is a very core sense that I'm connected to somebody. I'm bound to somebody. My identity is not something that I choose. It's something that I inherit, but at the same time, I don't necessarily understand what it was that I inherited. It's as if I have this huge responsibility. I have this inheritance, but nobody spoke to me about it. Here it is, it's assumed, but what does it really mean? maybe one of the reasons why Jews talk so much about Jewish peoplehood is that there's this core tension between something that's assumed to be so important and at the same time, one that we don't fully understand. And what I would like to do today is I would like to look at some of the frameworks that we use in our conversation, or some of the categories that make sense of the way Jews relate to each other as a community. This pertains, in a very large sense, to the relationship between Israeli Jews and world Jewry, in particular in North America. Two very, very strong communities. But it pertains to Jews all over the world. How do we see ourselves and the nature of the relationship that we have with each other? What I'm going to argue for is that there are certain categories which we've inherited, which seem to speak about who we are, but don't really work anymore. And one of the problems is that we try to fix our relationship. The relationship is now the issue, the nature of the relationship. But we fix it in a way that no even mediocre therapist would even contemplate. Because what we want to do is we want to fix our relationship by changing you, by changing those who somehow have a problem with the relationship, by somehow, how do I make you more like me? Now go try to work that as a therapist. Here, I go to a therapist, and we all know that we pick who's the therapist, the one that will tell our spouse or significant other that they're wrong. Good luck. So if you can get to such a therapy for a while, it might make you feel a little better. It's not going to be that productive. And somehow I feel that in the Jewish community, when we look at each other, there's something wrong with you. Don't you get that you should be like me? Don't you get that the categories that infuse me, that cause me to care about you, should be relevant to you? And somehow, I know, one of the things I often say is that in our community, we think there's a disease. Disease is called millennialism. How do we somehow get all millennials to have a consciousness of 70-year-old Jews? Instead of saying the nature of our community is one that we have multi-generational, multinational, multi-ethnic, so many different spheres trying to come together. And it's not gonna work by somehow, thinking that we could transport people back to a consciousness of 30, 40 years ago. But how do we take where Jews are now and ask, does this work? Does this not work? How do I adjust? How do I think? Now, in the times of Corona, or that's what we call it here in Israel, I understand you call it COVID-19. It's gotten both harder and easier. It's gotten easier because one of the core features of our attempt to respond is that we function within national group consciousness. While we infect each other initially, globally, and it is humankind, qua humankind, which is in this together, and the interconnectivity is very, very deep. At the same time, our immediate protection, our immediate defenses are local, are national. One of the great challenges to a discourse about Jewish peoplehood is the argument that Jewish peoplehood is yesterday's conversation. We are really, we're globalists. We're not part of, I don't want to see myself in one small little community. I'm part of a much larger, I'm part of the human race, humankind. The categories that define me are humanity, my gender, but certainly not some ethnic national identity. You're bringing me down into yesterday's conversation. I'm free. I'm free at last. Free at last. I'm now in a new universe. COVID-19 and Corona reminds us that within this global universe, we belong somewhere. And it's in the context of where we belong that we look out for each other. Loyalty and care grow within certain bonds that we have. And those bonds aren't bonds to human being qua human being, even though they're also there. But they are bonds to my community, particular communities. And in that context, particular communities have to look out for each other, for themselves. And each one of us right now is experiencing the disease very, very differently. In Israel, it's very different than the way you experience it in North America, for example. Where we all shared fear initially, but in Israel, we moved away from fear a long time ago. We have anxiety, we have difficulties, but existential fear has been removed from our discourse. In no small measure, and with a personal sense of deep gratitude to the way our political leadership navigated this process. So on the one hand, there's a legitimacy to speak about particular identity. But at the same time, COVID-19 asks, who is your particular identity? Who's your us? Is your primary us right now the Jewish people? Or is your primary us right now the people within your square kilometer or your state or your country? Who really claims you? Is this a time where you really see yourself as claimed by this Jewish people? Or I understand that national and collective identity now is coherent, but maybe it's the wrong one. Who said Jewish is the primary category that causes me to think right now? Maybe my concerns are other ones. So I have heard, and I'm traveling all over the world these last couple of weeks, but staying in my office. But as I travel and see the world, and air travel is much nicer right now as I stay in my office and imagine what it might be like. I'm meeting people, oh, Israel's going to discover the cure. There's all these sources of so-called national pride. But as a colleague of mine shared with me, she said, Danielle, I'm feeling real guilty right now because it's for 3 weeks now that I haven't thought about Israel. I frankly don't care about Israel right now. I'm worried about something else. I'm worried about my needs, my particular issues. I'm worried about what's happening in my country, in my city, in my state. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about you right now. And I said to her, it's really interesting that you're feeling strange about this unique moment. How do you think Israelis feel when there's a missile attack or a terrorist attack? Do you think we're thinking about right now what's good for world Jewry? We're thinking about our own interests. The reality is that even when we assume that we are together, the reality is we are apart. We're 10, 15, 20,000 miles apart. Dispersed all over the world, the assumption that our primary experience is one of togetherness is simply not true. Israelis feel that sense of aloneness all the time. Now, despite that, Corona or COVID-19 is going to come to an end. It accentuates certain issues. The question is, how are we going to continue to talk and to understand who we are? Not this moment. We don't need an answer for this singular moment. For this singular moment, all of our primary responsibilities is to make sure that we're safe, to make sure that we act responsibly to those around us and do everything in our power to make sure that we are helping them to be safe. That as citizens, we're acting responsibly. And that while we think locally, we also maintain a core moral recognition of all human beings being created in the image of God. If we could maintain that tension, right now, that's your issue. Jewish peoplehood, I'm giving this talk today. It's about what will be in 3 months. It'll be, how do we rebuild it? Or how do we re-engage with the conversation that it's okay if for a certain period of time, it's not the most significant issue that we face. So let's talk about us. Let's look at some of the categories. And if I could ask Michael, I want to share As we know, I'm going to be technologically very sophisticated today. I'm very impressed with myself, but I really shouldn't be impressed because it's Michael who's sophisticated. Michael, could you bring up the 5 categories? Thank you. There are 5. I want to just read them briefly, and then we'll talk, which in Zoom means I'll talk. We'll talk with each other. Let's look at these 5 categories. For much of Jewish life, over whether it's some of them for thousands of years and some of them just for the last sometimes 10, 20, 30, or 40 years, there are 5 core categories which carry the nature of our relationship with each other. And they're very, very different. The first and the oldest is the notion that Jews are family. And that means it's family connotes a group of people related by blood and having a shared sense of belonging and mutual obligation. Now, we're not really related by blood. But when we use the term blood, what we mean is that we don't choose our relationship. Family is essentially a group of people who feels bound to each other regardless of whether we like each other, regardless of whether we want to be with each other. My bond to you, my responsibility to you is a given. Now, in a small nuclear family, parents, children, it's simple. The minute your children will come back to this, get married, you can join a family. A family is actually not an institution which is not defined, it's not a racial institution. It's not defined by blood literally, but you can join and then you become part of that family. But once you join it, we don't choose our relationship, we inherit it. It's a given. Now, family does not just speak about an inherited relationship. A family is also a context in which we receive a sense of belonging, identity, and that identity also gives birth to mutual obligation. The second term is the notion of who are we? We're not family, we're fellow believers. That we are a group of people who don't inherit, we are a group of people who have to choose to belong. And we choose on the basis of a strong commitment to a shared religious belief, or a belief that something is right and good. Whether it depends how you define religious. It could be religious or it could be core values. Now, in a family, you don't leave. There is no exit. Fellow believers could have an exit. We have an exit when I don't believe you share with me anymore these core beliefs that brought us together. When I believe maybe that you're acting in bad faith. But essentially, if we choose to join with each other, at some moment we can also choose to leave each other. Either because you don't believe what I believe, or because maybe that belief is no longer so important to me. It might be there, but it's not a source to create our collective identity. A third category is that Jews very often see each other as co-partners. We're partners in a common undertaking. That common undertaking could be Jewish continuity, survival, Emil Fackenheim's 614th commandment not to give Hitler a pessimistic victory by disappearing. Or between Israel and world Jewry, we are partners with each other in maintaining the state of Israel and the future of just Jewish life. Now, the key feature of partners is, again, you choose. And exit is possible. But it's not so simple, because a partner is not just there for the profits. A partner also has to be there and take responsibility for risks. That's not the case with an investor who invests, and this is an important part of the Jewish people's relationship with each other, involves money and capital. It's one of the ways that Jews relate to each other. Very often, it's far easier for us to actually give other Jews money and to support them from afar than to actually want to be with them. And very often, I can give money to a synagogue I would never want to go into. I'm an investor in something, and the expending of money is a big part of it. We spend money, capital, resources, but then we do so with an expectation of achieving some profit, gain, or advantage, either individually or collectively. I can invest in you because I need a certain number of Jews. Or I could invest in Chabad, or I'm not an Orthodox Jew, but I'm investing in Chabad because they're reaching the Jews that I know that need to be reached. There's some advantage that I have. An investor, as distinct from a partner, could also leave far more quickly. And last, there is a new dimension to Jewish life in general and our relationship with each other. And that is that we're consumers. A consumer is not really part of a group. They purchase something or benefit from the use of goods and services. Now, a consumer could leave in the most easy way. A consumer leaves when there's another product that gives them what they want. A partner or an investor might have another alternative, but if this is still delivering, why not? A consumer, what threatens a consumer is just the existence of competition. I might even pick that other item, not even because it's better or less expensive. Maybe it's just because I'm bored. A major part of a consumerist ideology is that after a certain amount of time, I shop. It's a form of entertainment. How long am I going to stay with Apple, with my iPhone? Oh, so at some point, at what point will Samsung claim me? Not necessarily because it's a better product, but because, maybe it's time to change. I'll try it for a while. Not to speak of the fact that what happens when my product is just, it's not as good as I want it to be. What happens when it's not? Because in a consumer, it's about me. And that's why when we have super products or a super brand, what we try to do is we try to make sure that somehow you connect to the product, not simply because of the immediate use, but because somehow you see yourself as being different by using that product. And in this way, they try to immunize you from the temptation to move. So if I'm using an Apple product, it's not about what, it's about why. Because if I have an Apple product, somehow I'm a little more sophisticated. I'm an individual. So do you think I'm going to give up my iPhone and lose my identity? I'm like, iPhone helps me be cool. I'm really invested in this. And somehow once I bought into that language, I'm a little more thoughtful, I think, out of the box. Now they've immunized, but what happens when another product comes along? Or what happens when it doesn't deliver as well? Or it just doesn't mean as much for me? These are the categories. Let's go back now and think about their meaning for Jewish life in general. And if Michael, you could take the screen off, please. I'll continue until Michael stops the shared screen. There we go. Thank you. Family was one of the first and essential definitions of who we are. For me, it was a very important part of my Jewish life. I am bound personally. I'm just being descriptive. I feel bound, loyal to, and responsible for anyone who sees themselves as part of the Jewish people. If you see yourself, I don't care whether I agree with your conversion, it just doesn't matter. If you see yourself as part of the Jewish people, I'm like Ruth. Your people are wherever you go, I will go. The Jewish people have me, they claim me. And it's an essential part of how I see myself as a Jew. I love Judaism, and my profession is to teach Judaism, and I've done very well with it. But my core, my most basic instinct is more than I love Judaism. I start with the Jewish people, and that's the way our tradition is. Judaism, as distinct from Christianity and Islam, the Jewish people aren't a people built around a religion, as in the case of Christianity and as in the case of Islam. In Judaism, it's the reverse. The religion of Judaism is a religion that was given to a people who exist before it. The Jewish people claim it. I know it's an imagined family. I know we're not really a family. But that's the way I see who I am and my connection to others. And this was an essential way of looking at the world. And so I ask, what's my connection to Jews around the world? We're family. I'm there. You claim me. Just like my children claim me, you claim me. And if a Jew is in danger anywhere in the world, I don't sleep, period. I don't ask, do I like them? Do I not like them? What exactly is their ideology? It's just irrelevant to me. Your family, it's mishpacha, period. End of story. This has been inculcated into Jewish consciousness. There is no doubt that anti-Semitism helped. Part of anti-Semitism, there's good anti-Semitism and bad anti-Semitism. Bad anti-Semitism is when Jews die. Good anti-Semitism is when people hate us enough to strengthen our sense of mutual love and care. Who is my family? My family are those who the anti-Semites say are my family. That, by the way, is Israel's law of return. Who gets automatic citizenship in the state of Israel? Anybody who Hitler defines as a Jew. That's the law of Israel. Israel belongs to anyone who the anti-Semites of history said, you are a Jew, or you belong to the Jewish community. And since Hitler didn't distinguish between Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Post-denominational, and secular, that's the new line you have to learn how to say in one breath. If Hitler didn't distinguish, we don't distinguish either. Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And when I look at the world, I feel it. But one of the major mistakes is that because I feel it, do I assume necessarily that that's a model that could work for Jewish collective identity in the 21st century? More and more Jews don't necessarily think in terms of family. But I want to leave aside those who aren't thinking in terms of family and actually just reflect for a few minutes on whether family is even a coherent model. I know it's the model that I've lived by, but in the 21st century, does it really work? Let's talk about family for a moment. I said it initially, I am bound to anyone who sees themselves as a Jew, just as I am bound to my children. Very often family assumes that there's a clear hierarchy. There's two parents and there's children, and the children are little, and we assume, yes, here it is, we're all connected to each other. And I go back to the time when my children were little and we all sat around the table and I was responsible to them and we were all connected and life was simple. My children got married. It's not so simple anymore. What happens when your children get married? Your children build new relationships, which claim them. And I'm told that those claims are actually really important. I hate it. What, my kid should marry someone and actually feel more loyal to them than to me? I know, so but Danielle, let it go. It's necessary. Me, I'm your Abba. I've been there for you since the beginning. I'm the one, the unconditional love. And now what? No, I can't come this Shabbos because I want to be with my wife. I have to adjust. In family, that's actually, what is family? Family is not parents, single and children. Family, in fact, is brothers, sisters, adults with multiple relationships, multiple connections. And those connections claim us. So we get together. Most families, we do shiva well. Weddings, we don't do so well. In a wedding, who's going to sit next? I have the seating arrangements. Who's going to sit next to whom is not a simple question. You don't need seating arrangements for shiva, but you need seating arrangements for weddings. How often does family really get together? Does family really create day-to-day sense of core loyalty or a core relationship of care and concern? Not sure. Really not sure. The idea of Judaism of Jewish people as family is introduced in the book of Genesis. But what is the lesson of the book of Genesis? There are two lessons. The first is that Jews are a family, and the second is don't think that that's such a great thing, because frankly, we are a dysfunctional family. We were a dysfunctional family back then, and we've continued to be a dysfunctional family. the tribes, when we moved into the land of Israel, Ochenveld, it's nuts. So family might define who we are, but it certainly doesn't deliver this great, Hine matovu manayim shevet achim. Here, it's how wonderful as brothers and sisters sit next to each other. When is it that brothers and sisters sit next to each other? Oh, I love you. It was a great Seder. See you next Pesach. So family works in a profoundly anti-Semitic world. Now, while anti-Semitism still exists, it's not existentially dangerous enough in most places in Jewish life today to create the self-evidency of family. So an Israeli minister could come visit the Jewish community of America after Pittsburgh. He comes for a Shiva call, but he goes to a shul that if it wasn't Shiva, he wouldn't have gone to in the first place. Family actually doesn't deliver all that we thought that it does. And you know who didn't understand that? Prime Minister Netanyahu. When a number of years ago, he goes to the Congress in Washington and he attacks the President of the United States because he sincerely believes that the Iranian nuclear deal poses an existential threat to the Jewish people, or rather, to the state of Israel. And he turned to American Jews and said, "We're mishpacha. Hi, this is a Shiva moment. This is a crisis moment. Iran. I'm family. What else?" And what did American Jews say? I'm American. You assume that you're the parent calling the children. If you are the parent, I'm married. And part of my identity is now American. And it might even be that you're not the parent in the first place. What happens if our parents aren't even alive anymore and we are just two siblings, each one with the story of having come out of Egypt together 3,000 years ago, but now we're brothers and sisters and we're married and we have much more complicated relationships? What happens if we're third cousins? We want to save and create this primary loyalty of the Jews through the model of family. And I'm not sure that it works. And notice, even in the reverse, when world Jewry says to Israel, we're family, how could you have a relationship with Orban in Hungary? It's bad for the Jews. Israel says, I know we're family, but I'm an Israeli. I have a responsibility to my home. We live apart. We're in separate homes. We may be our family, but we're in family in two different homes. And we have nuclear sub-families within this larger mythic imagined community. And frankly, my other families, and that family could be America or Australia, or it could be Uruguay or Canada, whatever it might be. I don't know who else is on this list. Please include yourself. Israel. I have other family needs. And I know, for example, that if I ever insulted in front of my children, either a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law, I would stop being welcome in their house. And I know, at least in theory, rightfully so. I have to say it to myself over and again so that I could grow as a human. I really am a great father-in-law, just so you should know. I'm really nice. And so Israel assumes, what very often the paradox is that we assume that all Jews are family. That you have to relate to me as family, but I have some greater loyalty sometimes that I have to work on the basis of. It doesn't work that way. Family might have worked with very small, dispersed Jews all over the world, each one in profound need of the other for survival. When we now have 90% of the Jewish world living in two communities, each one powerful, family just doesn't deliver what it used to deliver. So it's not that, let me refine the question. It's not that somehow there is a new generation of Jews who don't care about Jewish peoplehood. But what happens if there's a new generation of Jews who feel very deeply multiple, more complicated connections in which Jew as family is not enough. Maybe my primary family is my gender group. Maybe my primary family is my neighborhood, my country, my socioeconomic, my ideological party, my Jewish denomination. It's time for us to recognize that we've grown up as a people. Anti-Semitism infantilizes us, and the Jewish people aren't infants anymore. We still cope with anti-Semitism, but it doesn't infantilize us. And as a result, family's just not going to deliver the type of glue that we need. At the opposite extreme of family is a new category that's emerged recently. And that is a consumerist consciousness to much of Jewish life. Consumerism is a major part of Western identity. But Jews were outside of Western identity because we were the perennial outsiders. We took from it, but wasn't shaped by us. But as we are accepted more and more, consumerism has come to define greater amounts of our collective consciousness. What does it mean? As a family member, I move to a community. I go, I give to Federation. I look for the local synagogue and become a member. I swim in a JCC. All these institutions that are fundamentally family-based institutions. And I join. And I don't even ask myself, why do I join? Please remember, 80+% of Jews who are members of conservative and reform synagogues only show up 2 to 3 times a year. So who's asking, 1 second, am I getting a good return on my money? It's not my question. I'm a member. Sometimes I might even be a member of another synagogue, which I don't even go to because they need some help. Part of what's changing in Jewish life, and this is the category of that we are Jews by choice, is that in general, inherited membership, inherited connections are less significant. We choose them. But in doing so, we are actually members of multiple communities simultaneously. And which community we go to is going to be a direct consequence of what I get from it. So numerous institutions which are built on the membership model now have to ask themselves, well, is the membership model even a good model for a consumer? Consumers aren't members. Consumers buy, they take what they want. And North American Jewish institutions, at least, are all, and many Israelis are scrambling now to how do we redefine our relationship with people who aren't family, but are asking themselves a very simple question. What have you done for me lately? Now, as a family member, I say, what are you, crazy? But yes, what have you done for me lately is a legitimate question to ask. Now, in many ways, this has also caused a renaissance in Jewish life. Because what have you done for me lately actually asks me to force myself, how do I do my product better? How do I improve my Hebrew school? How do I improve my services? How do I speak in a way that people want to hear? When I don't assume that I have a captive audience, Judaism is going to get better. So consumerism is not all bad, but it does create profound challenges, in particular in the relationship between Israel and world Jewry. If beforehand as world Jewry, Israel would say to world Jewry, or world Jewry would assume, we're family. I know, I don't like you. I know you passed this legislation, and I know you're insulting me all the time, but you don't pick your family. I don't pick Israel. We're stuck. Our destiny is together. Remember Hitler, blah, blah, blah. We go on and on. But what happens when someone says, excuse me, I have multiple families, and it's a much more complicated relationship. What have you done for me lately? Do you share my values? Do you respect me? Now here too, consumerism has changed. For a long time, there was a consumer relationship between Israel and world Jewry also, where Israel said to world Jewry, I'm going to have a relationship with you because you are a strategic ally, in particular in North America, but also around the world as a result of your financial success. So even though I, as a Zionist, believe that the only legitimate place for a Jew to be is in Israel, even though I, as a Zionist, believe that the only Judaism that has a future is in Israel, I am still going to respect you and have a relationship with you because I'm consuming a product that you're going to deliver for me. You're going to deliver for me resources. You're going to deliver for me political power. You're going to help me in my product, in my project. I consume what world Jewry has to offer. What happens, however, when Israel sits down and says, You know, maybe there's another product. So Israel is providing for me, so Jews, excuse me, are providing for me support. Maybe I could get better support from Christian evangelicals. Maybe I could do better with nationalists. Maybe I could do for Israel. Who said that you're my greatest strategic ally? This is a shift that occurred to Netanyahu when he felt that North American jury, particularly American jury, turned its back on him. And he said, you're not such great partners. I'm investing in you. You're not returning. I have a much better way to return on my investment. And they don't care. They don't even think there's an occupation. You actually want to talk to me about an occupation. And frankly, they don't care how many kotels I want. I could sit with as many ultra-Orthodox parties as I want forever and ever, and it doesn't cause you any consternation. It's you're actually a crappy product for me to have to, I don't want to consume that product anymore. What happens when for much of world Jewry, for in a post-Holocaust universe, you consume a product from Israel, which is a product which is, you're giving me a safety net. Not if anti-Semitism returns, but when anti-Semitism returns. You're providing for me pride post-67. I'm getting a lot from my relationship to Israel. But what happens when I'm not feeling that I'm getting it that much anymore? I'm just not. I don't need Israel as a safety net because most Jews feel at home. Most Jews feel at home. And they don't think, they could be wrong, but they're not thinking in terms of what will happen when the next Holocaust happens. And for those of you who say, yes, we are, well, I have to tell you, any Jew who invests in real estate is a Jew who does not believe that a Holocaust is imminent. Prior to that, Jews never invested in real estate. We invested in cash. We were in diamonds. We could move. So if this is the case, consumerism, just like family, which brought us together, is now beginning to separate us as well. Because we have to compete much more for each other's loyalty, for each other's attention. We have to ask ourselves, just like synagogues do, how do I keep somebody involved with me? To assume that Jews will be Jews by choice on every issue, but when it comes to Jewish people and the relationship with Israel, is simply a fundamental mistake. I won't be able to get through all the categories. Let me just do one last one. And that is the category of fellow believers. For a long time, we assumed that we have a shared belief. We shared Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. We share principles of democracy and liberalism and pluralism, etc. Now it's true, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Or Israel's the best democracy in the Middle East. But that's not a very high standard. More and more Jews question whether we actually do have shared beliefs. What happens when the Judaisms of Israelis are very different from the Judaisms of world Jewry? And it's rightfully so. In each case, our Judaisms emerge and respond to our own experiences. I'm not getting into a question of whether, who's right. Does Abu Mazen want peace or does not want peace? That's beyond my pay grade, and none of us really know. That's not my issue. But what happens when Jews around the world have different beliefs about the possibility of peace, the significance of peace? I would say to you, and with this I want to conclude and open it up for whatever questions that you might have had. In a world where we are relating to each other through the categories of family and consumerism, collective Jewish life is seriously challenged. The only way we can reclaim our relationship is if we rebuild a language of shared beliefs with each other. Now, shared beliefs doesn't mean that we have to have the same political positions. You might believe that Abu Mazen doesn't want peace, and I might believe that Abu Mazen wants peace. But do you believe that peace is a value? Do you believe that human rights is a value? Do you believe that all human beings are created in the image of God? Do you believe that Jews have a right to use power? Do you believe that the use of power has to be done justly? If we could agree on all of these issues, which we could talk about at another time, then we could disagree on what the policies are, but we could connect to each other through a core shared belief. Do you believe that Israel has to be the homeland of the Jewish people? And as the homeland of the Jewish people, it's not just a place where Jew feels safe, it's also a place where their Judaism has to feel safe and be respected. We have spent 72 years building a strong Israel, and we've done it together as family, as investors, as partners. We've built it through shared belief. My friends, the story has changed. We don't have shared beliefs anymore. And so some people say, you know what, we're never going to have shared beliefs anymore. Let's go back to family. Sorry, the train has left the station, and I want to tell you, it's not such a great train in the first place. It doesn't take you where you think it's going to take you, and in any event, it's not the story. If we want to build it, it took us 72 years to build a great, powerful, successful, phenomenal country. I thank God that I live in Israel. It is one of the most wonderful places to live and to raise my children, to be. My friends, we're not going to build a strong Jewish people by trying to find short-term solutions. And we're not going to build a relationship with each other by trying to transport us back. And we're not going to build a relationship with each other by scaring, oh, Hitler's coming back again, it's Kristallnacht. And every single time there's a swastika in a gravestone, it's Kristallnacht all over again. It's not. Even when there is Jewish death, it's not Kristallnacht. It's completely different between state-sponsored anti-Semitism and when the state is there with us together. You're not going to recreate family through anti-Semitism. And consumerism alone is too high a standard. And it's too fickle. We need to start talking with each other and beginning a massive educational project both in Israel and world Jewry about what are the values that we share. There's going to be values that we don't share. That's okay too. We're never going to have, the Jewish people aren't going to have a shahadat like Islam. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is God's messenger that all Jews are going to agree upon. It's never going to be. Judaism is going to divide us more than it unites us. But at the core, is there a shared value language? Can we be shared believers together? Can we find things that we care about, where Jews in Israel and around the world connect and say, yes, this is our mission together. Not a mission which declares how wonderful Israel is, but a mission in which we unite together around a vision of what Israel might be and ought to be. And when we do that, we're also going to reclaim family. Because you want to know one of the interesting things about family? While we have different loyalties, when we enjoy being with each other, when we feel that we have a shared purpose, then we're not just going to be connected because of that shared purpose. Our common roots are then going to be something that we want to embrace again with each other. We've always talked about we, because rightfully so, we're worried. It's in our hands to work very hard to lower that anxiety. That anxiety is profoundly important, but it's only important if it inspires us to change the way we talk and to begin to do the serious work of building a community which intersects family, consumer, shared believer, partner, and investor. Thank you. And now we have 10 minutes for any questions that you might have. Rebecca, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danielle, for laying this framework out so beautifully. We've had a number of questions come in, so I'm going to present a couple and hope we'll see how many we can manage.
Let's do two at a time.
All right, let's do two. So Fran is asking this first question, and she's wondering, are these categories mutually exclusive, or is it possible that there's blurred lines between them? How do they meld together? And do they only apply to Jews, or could they be expanded?
Okay, and the second question?
So the second question is from Harry, and he's wondering, are there limits to those who are entitled to claim a kinship or family connection? At what point do you start talking about the exit relationship?
Beautiful questions. Oh, it's a pleasure being with you. Thank you for really nice questions. Okay, the first one. Are these categories mutually exclusive? As I said at the end, they're not. Now, in some individuals, they might become caricatures of these, but there's almost nobody who is only one. Family is not just blood, it also is shared beliefs. There's also senses of partnership. The lines are always blurred. But what's interesting about categories is that how exactly they should be blurred. Do you need all 5? Are 3 enough? I tend to think that 3 are enough. Which 3, though, we could disagree about. Can you have a Jewish life without any notion of family? Maybe, but then you really have to have a strong sense of partnership and shared belief. Could consumer and family live with each other? A little bit, not that well, but they can. It depends what type of consumer you are and how. So they can blur, but that's the game. And each one of us, our job as Jews is to complexify the conversation so that different Jews could use different categories for their own, to build a space where they feel that they could belong. So don't berate someone who says family's not meaningful to me. Say, great, that's where you are now, okay. Let me work on shared belief and partnership. Do they only apply to Jews? Certainly not. Jews aren't unique in just about anything. Maybe we worry the most, but they're not. Now, not every community has an ethnic family identity to it, so not all of them, and there might be other communities which have in which other features are more important. Does Islam have an investor category? I'm not as sure. But by definition, these categories apply to so many other collective groups, whether it's Jewish, American, Canadian, Australian, Uruguayan, or whatever, plus other religious traditions, plus questions of communities such as my community, doesn't even have to, my state, doesn't have to be it could be my club, etc. Are there limits? It's a great question. There have to be. My first book was on the boundaries of Judaism, in which I argue that there is no notion, and this is not that I argue, this is a sociological fact, there is no community without boundaries. There is none. If there is no there's no reason to belong there or to go there. And so there has to be that which is outside. But the question of limits is a very, very complicated one, because if you put them in the wrong place, instead of strengthening your community, you destroy it. And in fact, one of the great tensions of limits is whether the limits are defined by theoretical constructs of what Judaism ought to be, or whether it's defined fundamentally also by who the members of your community are. So for example, you can't construct a boundary that 20% of your community violate. So yes, there are limits, but it goes beyond the context of today's lecture. Be careful where you put them, because be careful in the context of trying to build limits to protect the Jewish people. What you actually are doing is destroying them and bifurcating them. That is very often what happens within the context of denominational Jewish life. So it's a huge question you're asking. I would just say that the law of return, Israel's current law of return, is by far the most pluralistic definition of Jewish peoplehood and Jewish collective identity ever created in the history of Jewish life. Ever created. A Jew is someone who's born from a Jewish father or a Jewish mother, converted Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, secular, married to a Jew, one Jewish grandparent. Using Hitler and the Nuremberg laws, we actually create a very broad umbrella in which, even if I don't think you're a Jew, you can be part of the Jewish community of Israel. I think it's a healthy law. How do we build boundaries is very important. For me, one of the essential boundaries today is, are you claiming a place at the table? It's like at the Seder, who is the wicked child in our tradition? As if there is a wicked child. The one who says, Ma avodah zot lachem, what is this worship to you? And since he said lachem v'lo lefi shehotzia et atzmo min haklal kafar ba'ikar, since he said to you and not to him, He has separated himself from the community, and in our tradition, to separate yourself from the community is a heresy. There is no other religious tradition which claims that separating from the community is a heresy. That's a good boundary to start with, but that conversation would require much more time. Rebecca, do we have one more?
Yes, we have one more, and I think a few people have asked questions along the same line, so I'm kind of going to compartmentalize them. But how do we bridge the reality that older American Jews, North American Jews, still cling to the family model, whereas younger Jews maybe are prioritizing a different model, perhaps consumerism?
Great. Beautiful. I feel that I was understood, and so I really appreciate it. Sometimes in Zoom, you don't know. Here it is, I'm talking, and I'm have to be my own energy because I don't see you. Thank you. How do we bridge the gap? We don't. First of all, you don't. You don't. You don't try to bridge gaps. You don't try to turn 30-year-olds into 65-year-olds or 80-year-olds. I am who I am. I know. I'm going to be 62. I know who I am. And I don't expect success in Jewish education is not how do I make Jews older. That's just not, that's insane. First, you don't try to bridge the gap. In our tradition, you speak to someone in a language where they come from. And that's why it's so important to have multiple categories for different Jews to connect in different ways. But I would add one other feature. I don't think younger Jews have difficulty with the category of family. I think they have difficulty with the way the category of family is used. And when the category of family is used in a way that they feel might have certain racist undertones, when they feel it is not balanced with universal values, when they feel that it is unexplained, family, together with shared values, is a completely different family. So when 90% of Jews in the Pew survey say we're proud to be Jewish, what are they talking about? So it's not that Jews don't feel that they're part of a family. It's that we express it differently. So some people say, well, second, they're intermarrying, they're not part of a family. Narishkeit. It's just a different notion. It's different sensibilities, different definitions. Part of what we need to do, and this is a great place to end, not only do we want to have 5 categories, and you know what? If you have another 7, God bless you. So as not to create a dictatorship of one category over the other. Jewish life will never work that way. But also don't create a dictatorship as to what they need. Don't try to dictate the essential features of shared belief. Don't try to dictate whether someone's a good or bad consumer. Allow people to access each category in a way that enables them to breathe. At the end, we have walked together for 3,000 years. We're going to walk together if we invite people in ways that make sense for them to be part of this 3,000-year-old story. As Clifford Geertz says, culture is defined by the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Well, we've inherited phenomenal stories. Right now, we are at the moment where we have to write our own chapter. And that chapter that you write is not just defined by what you've inherited, but it's defined by your ability to bring yourself into the conversation. We who care have to be careful not to be destructive, not to mean well in the worst sense of the term, as Mark Twain used to say, by trying to define what it means to be a good Jew, a loyal Jew, a lover of Israel. Give the Jewish people a place to breathe. If you give them a place to breathe, the beauty of our people and the beauty of our tradition has a chance to emerge. It was a pleasure being with all of you. Lila Tov from Jerusalem.
Danielle, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom and for joining us virtually. I wish we could have had you here in person, but we're grateful for this opportunity. And thank you, Rabbi Rubinstein, for co-sponsoring this with Congregation Beth Ahm, and we're grateful for your partnership. And just a reminder to everybody to please fill out the survey at the end of this call and look for more wonderful Shalom Hartman programming coming your way. Be well and be healthy. And thank you so much again for joining from all over the world.
Thank you.